On today's show, we'll be talking with Paul Costello about how remembering history can become a new story that builds resilience. The opening words of Paul's book is a wonderful promise from the practices and principles of creating memories to mend our broken lives. We all have broken places in our lives. Paul brings a new magic that helps us make life whole. Stay tuned. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking the resilient leader in you. Einstein said, "You can't use an old map to explore a new world." As I read that quotation, I immediately thought of the crumpled, dirty, old atlas that rides in the back seat of our car. Why it remains there is a mystery to me. It doesn't seem to matter where we are headed, across the country to visit family or across town to go to a new doctor. We open GPS and let it guide us. That got me thinking of what maps I use that were drawn years ago, even though I know that life has changed the route. For example, when I went to college, I remember changing my major about 2 weeks in to mathematics. And when I told my mother what I had done, being a very practical person, her response was, "Well, I guess you could always teach." That conversation became a story to me. I never liked the idea of teaching, but it stayed in my memory, even when I had a job after job that did not involve teaching. In fact, it's been 40 years before I did any teaching as a part of my work. Paul's book helped me look again at that old story. It was a story from my early life, before I had a career. What I never realized was that I had changed that old story from teaching to a new story of being practical. When new opportunities open for me, I use the new story of being practical as part of making the decision. Keep in mind that idea of having an old story and how it can be changed. And in that changing, the possibilities expand. My guest today is an old friend and colleague. He has done some of the most remarkable work for peace in this world. Paul Andrew Costello says he's not big on bios, but he says he is an international educator. It means he is from Australia, ended up in Washington, D.C., inspired by his research at AU, which I'm going to assume is American University, or maybe it's Australian University. I'm going to have to ask Paul which it is. And his mentor, Michael White, the founder of narrative therapy. He founded Storywise in 1998, the Center for Narrative Studies. He has Irish roots and is a bit of a rebel and has worked to make narrative mainstream through Golden Fleece and through congressionally partnered international peace programs. He has trained young leaders from Ireland, South Africa, and the Middle East. The last, let me see if I pronounce this right. Taoiseach, no, I'm going to say it again. Taoiseach, Prime Minister of Ireland. Well, we may have to go back and correct that. And the current Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland are both his graduates. He also runs Project Change, the local AmeriCorps program in Montgomery County, Maryland, with his team serving kids struggling in the school system. The future is his most recent obsession, and practicing the art of futuring, being curious about what he doesn't know or what he knows that gets in the way of what he needs to know. I know virtually all the big names of storytellers as a result of my own work in story. But I will tell you that of all the people I know who work with story, he has the deepest understanding of story of any of them. He thinks he has a story. I know he does. Paul, it is an honor to welcome you to Unlocked.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you so much. It's always a happy reunion. A happy
Indeed.
reunion, whether it's in London or whether we're in New York or wherever we were the teaching duo of so many amazing times and places. So thank you for inviting me back. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Well, you know what? I have to go back and ask you. AU, is that American?
It's American University. So yeah,
I
the
did guess it
American
right.
the American story is what enhanced the Australian story. So yeah,
Okay.
AU American University is my alma mater here.
All right. Now, this word that's obviously Gaelic,
Yes, it is. It's an Irish word, and they pronounce it Taoiseach, and
Taoiseach.
Taoiseach, which means chieftain. But when you translate it, it means prime minister. So Leah Varadkar was one of my students back in 2000, and he served two different times as the Irish prime minister, and they call it the Taoiseach.
Well, I have to admit, I went on to Google to find out how it was supposed to be pronounced. And obviously, it was not right.
Well, join the club. Join the club. I mean, when I used to call this musician called Dovrak. I used to call him, and someone tapped me on the shoulder. It's Dvorak, and I used to call him Dovrak.
Okay. You're making me feel better already. Listen, before we get into the meat of our conversation today, I would like you to talk about the Washington Ireland program, how that grew out of the work with story, or maybe it was the reverse. Just talk about that a bit because that was such an
Sure.
important contribution.
I came across Michael White in Australia. He's an Australian from Adelaide who's the founder of narrative therapy back in 1990, I think. So that just got me, switched me on. His idea of story was that, people aren't sick, they just live in sick stories, and families aren't dysfunctional, they live in dysfunctional stories. So you don't have to heal the person, you have to heal the story. And I think, wow, that's amazing. So it led me on a sort of a quest. American University gave me a chance to do postgraduate research on where narrative was popping up in anthropology, which is where it was so core, sociology, journalism, poetry, literature, whatever. So with Michael White and American University's research, um, we got inspired to start the Center for Narrative Studies, which is storywise.com. And then almost providentially, my colleague in the center was working with Northern Ireland leaders. And so we got they were a little program called it's now called the Washington Island program, but they were struggling. They couldn't work out how they could get Protestant and Catholic young adults together to listen to each other. And so we were invited in 1998 to actually take your ideas, your theories, and put them into practice. See if it works. So it was a wonderful little laboratory that I worked with for 10 years, called the Washington Island Program, bringing Catholic and Protestant young adults to Washington to work in Congress, often working together in the same office, Catholic Protestant, and living in the same host family, Catholic Protestant, because in Northern Ireland, particularly in Belfast, there's a dividing wall. They didn't really ever have a shared experience, and so the thing was to come in the summer. They're 20-year-olds. They're not kids. They're not little
Yeah, yeah.
little kids. They we remember what we were like when we were 20, 21, 22, falling in love, falling out of love, getting drunk, doing stupid things. So vulnerable to be impressed, And so that was the prime, it was the perfect time, get these young people here and have them create a shared experience together and then have them express that experience. Who was it? Aristotle, who said, someone said, if it's not expressed, it's not impressed. So the unfolding experience, they got up in front of Congress, they got up in front of the ambassadors, so that you were creating a new shared story between Catholics and Protestants who've grown up cultures where they were told the story, don't trust the other side. So that was like, now that program's still going strong, and I can now look at the results of it 30 years later. And 2 weeks ago there was a outburst in Belfast. There was violence on the streets, and I'm looking at the Northern Irish Parliament, and I'm seeing Emma Little Pengelly, who's the deputy leader of Northern Ireland. One of my kids getting up there and saying, "Violence. We do not condone violence in any shape or form." And then the leader of the opposition is really getting stuck into her and saying, "Emma, what are you doing?" Is Matthew O'Toole, and he's the leader of the opposition in Northern Ireland Parliament, and he's saying, "We cannot condone violence. We can." So I'm thinking, wow, it worked. Like, it wasn't just us, but the time was right for Northern Ireland, particularly the women leaders, Madelyn, just kind of told the men where to go if the violence was going to continue.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So in a sense, when I see all these leaders pop up in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, and I hear their story, and I kind of feel like, wow, that was a test case.
Yeah.
And it kind of worked,
Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, in your book, because this is what we're really here to talk about, is your book. Oops, let me get it in front. Our stories rise up, remembering as resilience, recovering from. Now, this was written for the pandemic.
It was.
But to me, as I read it, even though we're not in a pandemic today, what drew me was how you explored the thing of stories that we tell ourselves by looking at a bit of history, and how our stories shift over time, and how we move from old stories to new stories, and whether we hold on to old stories or determine new stories. Would you talk about your framework? I have some images that we can use, right. So you just tell me when you need them.
Yeah, I mean, linking it to the Irish work, and then it became South African work and Israel-Palestine work, where we kind of ran into a bit of a brick wall. But it kind of struck me that over time, we weren't just creating a new story. The new story had to, we had to create an experience, and then that experience had to be invited to be storied in the process, not wait till the end. And then you knew that if it's going to be told as a story, it's going to get embedded as a memory. And then every year afterwards, on 4th of July, for example, like next week, there'll be emails back and forth through various classes of the Irish program that they'll revisit that memory and connect it to the new story that they're in right now. And so it just seemed to me, the stories keep changing, they keep growing, they keep being enriched. So what is that process around? And then the same thing with the AmeriCorps program that I run, thinking I'm not just giving them a chance to serve young kids who are struggling for a year. I want them to be like the Taoiseach of Ireland, 30 years later, who will say to Nancy Pelosi, you're telling me about America, Nancy, but I know as much about it as you. Don't you realize that the tour you give the Irish delegation every St. Paddy's Day is exactly the same tour I gave when I was interning with Congressman Quinn in 2000. So it's just like, it made me think it's the future of the experience that we can derive, nurture, inspiration, healing. So in other words, like, every moment of our day and our experience, or even what you and I are doing now, Madelyn, we're creating a future. And so, is it memorable? We can go back to it. If it's memorable, we can add new chapters to it. So this whole thing, it got to when the COVID thing stuck and stopped us. It seemed like the wheels had grind down, and everyone was in crisis and panic. And I mean, I remember my in the stories in the book, I told my AmeriCorps members to stay in the story of service. I don't care what the hell you're doing. One member was doing kindergarten in Seattle online, totally outside what she should have been doing, and said, I don't care. Create a new story. I said, look at the people in your apartment complex. So it's in the book. One of our members suddenly noticed an elderly lady upstairs who had nobody visiting her. And it's like, and that became a story. It's in the book. So it's kind of like, and then I'm thinking they're going to look back at those memories now that COVID wasn't just the memory of disaster and death and destruction. There's something there that built a future that maybe wouldn't have been possible without the crisis. And I've been intrigued. And the Greeks have the word, is it crisis? There's chronos, which is normal time, and then there's crisis, which breaks it, and then there's kairos. Kairos, the kairos moment, how the future breaks in to the present through the gap that crisis has opened up.
Oh,
And you know what I mean? I think
what an image is in my mind is happening. This is great.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of so. I love what you said. Is it was written for the COVID, but it's actually written probably for now as well. You could write a book about what memories are we creating now about the government, about the issues of immigration and the wars and the economy. Like, are we talking ourselves into a depression that's more to do with what we're telling ourselves in terms of the stories? And maybe there's a new story that's trying to get our attention.
Paul, when you talked about crisis and that it breaks it, that was a real revelation for me, because just as you said, we have so many stories we're telling ourselves about today. And if we stay that way, then the future story is going to sound very similar.
Yeah.
But once I saw that it was broken, I said, I can begin to create new possibilities.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the work that I've been doing now is sort of the new, I guess you could say, I fell in, I love stories, and I've seen them at work, and I've seen their power. And that was the focus of Storywise, and wonderful Golden Fleece, you and Steve Denning and Seth, all these wonderful people, so inspired. It was a season of creativity.
It wasn't.
Then, against all advice, I said, let's do Israel Palestine. And everyone said, you're crazy. Don't go there. Don't touch it. And I did. And they were right. And I was wrong in the sense of brick wall. I thought if you could change the story, you could change the world, and discover that, in fact, that world wasn't ready to change. So if the world doesn't change, then I've got to change my story. and in my stage of life, like both of us, aren't exactly in the start of our careers, Madelyn. It seemed to me that I've discovered marrying narrative and future studies, or futuring, has recovered my faith in story. That I'm suddenly discovering that something about story that I never really grasped before, around its future shaping potential. And we can talk a little bit about that. But I don't know. I probably lost my track there, because you got to keep me on. You got to keep me.
I know you. I'm thinking, what if we showed the framework, and then give some examples around that?
Well, just before you show it, let me just sort of say that, the headlines scream new, or innovation, or we've never been so polarized. We've never so. And then you suddenly think, you know what? Or in Northern Ireland, there was always a breakthrough, and then there was a breakdown, and then there was a brink, and then there was another breakthrough, and then there was another brink, and there was another breakdown. So you suddenly got suspicious to say all these claims about change. We've really made a change, have you? It's new, it's brand new. Sounds like we did that 10 years ago. So I guess part of this new model, this template you're going to show, it developed in the Northern Ireland work, to say we overclaim the new, the innovation, the breakthrough, when in fact it's just a repeat. We're dressing up the old method in a new wrapping. And what we're saying is new it's not new. We just want you to pay attention to it.
Okay.
We just want you to. So if you want to show that, we can explain it a little bit. So I'm into these matrices, and in terms of, you just make a 4-square box like this, and you put old story, new story at the top, and then you repeat it at the side. Usually these kind of things have two different things. The top and the bottom are two different. So there's 4 differentials. This is just 2 differentials. And it's just interesting. So an old story of an old story. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. So I'm an Irish background, so the husband comes home on a Friday night drunk, and the wife says, "Drunk again." Saying old story of an old story. Or next in the next 3 months, someone's going to say to us, "This is the most important election of your lifetime. November's going to be the most important election of your lifetime." And you look back for the last 30 elections and everyone said the same thing. It's an old story of an old story. It's just on repeat. It's a pattern that you can predict. Then, say, Friday night, husband comes home and he's been to a revival meeting, and he comes back with Bibles or books of Mormon, and he wants to praise Jesus or Allah. And you think, oh, well, he's really not. He's not with us on Friday night. Either he's drunk or now he's got religious fervor. But it is a new story of an old story. Dad comes home a bit crazy on a Friday night. Last Friday he was drunk. This Friday he's got Jesus. So it's a new story of an old story. There's a break in the pattern, but it doesn't break the pattern. Okay? So then if you move to next Friday night, hubby comes home and he's got 5 airline tickets, and he says, "Mum, grandma, 5 kids, we're going to Disney World next week. We're going to Disney World next week. I'm sick of it. I realize that I'm not taking care of you, and I'm going to absolutely transform my life. And every Friday night now, we're going to do a treat for you, Mum, for all the work you've done, and grandma and all the kids." And you think, now that's not just a break in the pattern. That's a new pattern. And every Friday night from then on, hubby comes home with gifts, flowers, perfume, toys for the kids. Like, that's a new story of a new story. Wow, what happened? So there's nothing to compare it with. Nothing to compare it with. That's a new story of a new story. And then, of course, after a while, when he's been doing that for a year or 2 or 3, and you're having movie nights every Friday night, it'll become, the surprise will leach out of it, and we'll start to say, "Oh my God, Dad, we love the movies you take us to on a Friday night, but they're boring. They're boring. Can you get us to more exciting movies? Or we've been to Disney World 5 times. Can we go to Six Flags?" So suddenly, in that last story, old story of a new story, it's kind of like we tame the surprise, but the change is still there. Or I use another example, like a grandma. What President Obama? How does he compare to other black presidents? Were other black presidents just as good? There weren't any other black presidents. New story of a new story. Now, of course, at the end of his presidency, he's just like all the rest, isn't he? He's just all the rest. He took money from Silicon, but see there, old story of a new story. To take it sort of extracts the surprise of it, but in a way you really can't. It's like, that's new. That's a new story. Or Madeline, when your what kind of iPhone did your mother use when she was raising you?
It was called a rotary phone.
She didn't have could it take photos? Like, so you think this little machine is like, that's a new story of a new story. And we'll try and connect it to the previous one, but in fact it's such a revelation of something totally new has entered into the world. We don't have a map to know. We don't have a way of tracking where it's going to take us. And I think that's the same thing happening right now with AI. It's kind of like the people who invented cars scared the people who had horses, and the people who invented planes scared the people who had balloons. And so it's like that new story of a new story creates a reaction of fear and anxiety, but it's also maybe a symptom that say, hang on a second, stop listening to my complaints and my anxieties and my fears. Maybe something new is happening here. Wow. I wonder, maybe what I know is getting in the way of what I need to know. And you and I laugh at this. It's like I want to run a college. It's called the PhD of Unlearning. And all the engineers and lawyers and doctors, if you want to trade in your PhD, the first 2 years is unlearning everything you learned that's useless now or irrelevant. And the next 2 years is learning what you need to learn. So it's kind of like like unlearn and then relearn sort of thing. So because something new is happening, and I think we're trapped in old stories such that we're not seeing it, but we're feeling the effects of it.
Yeah,
We're
but you know
feeling
what? I think we're at a particular place in our national history where, and forgive me if I take us off in a different direction,
Sure.
but we keep saying that we're a divided nation, like this is
Right.
something new,
Right.
when in fact, and I'd like you to talk about this, there were times in our past when we were a divided nation.
Right. Absolutely. Well, see, there's the myth of the United States of America is a legal fiction created in a constitution. Even this sesquicentenary, it's like it's the Declaration of Independence. It's not the Constitution. It's not the birth of a nation. It's 13 nations saying to Britain, "Get lost," and a very loose. So the myth is this is where the nation began. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. That's a myth. And then 1776 marks the year of the first Civil War. If you look at Ken Burns's latest documentary, the War of Independence was a civil war. 40% or whatever of the American citizens wanted to stay with Britain. It wasn't a universally popular revolution. Talk to Benedict Arnold about that. I mean, so we think we've done a wonderful job of the story that we're united, and look at our soccer team playing this week, and we're going to win. And it's like, but the founders are smarter than that. They knew this is country and city and rural and poor and rich and like slave and free. Like they knew we were a mess. And they said, how can we make the mess work for us? And the way we make mess, presume we're disunited. Let's presume that as our benchmark. We are never going to be together, but we create structures that force us to agree for the common good. But most of the other time, we don't have to be united. I mean, I think it's Erasmus, maybe it's somebody else, but it's like in the essential things, unity, in everything else, diversity, and in all things, charity. So I think the founders kind of saw that we're a pretty obstreperous kind of people as Americans. No one's going to tell us what to do. And unity? No, it's unison, not unity. They created a constitution to create unison, meaning you sing together. But unity, no, not unity wasn't the goal. And why would you divide government? Unity is when you have a king. Unity is when you have an emperor. Unity is when you have the Church of England telling you everything what to do. That's unity. That's the last thing Jefferson wanted. That's the last thing Madison wanted. So I think, again, it's like, what story are we telling ourselves there and beating ourselves up for? Unity in the way we are mythologizing is rare. It's hardly ever happened. Maybe the day after Pearl Harbor, maybe the day after 9/11. For a day, that's all. Yeah. Or when the United States women's soccer team in front of like 300,000 people at the Olympics in Atlanta, or 100,000, win the gold medal. Like, we're united then, but give me a break. We're never united any other time. And why are we beating ourselves up as if we should be? Like, diversity is what happens in nature. We relish the diversity in nature. Unity, uniformity, boring. That's not American. That's not American.
I don't think anybody has ever used that term. Boring. All right. And clearly what you're saying is in 1776 there was disunity. Certainly we know in our Civil War there was disunity.
Right.
But there's something that comes out of that Civil War. Abraham Lincoln wrote to Congress in 1862, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country." Talk about what disenthrall means, because you talked earlier about that we have to start throwing some of these stories out. So, and unlearning.
Right.
Talk about disenthrall. I love that word.
Thank you, Madeline. Yeah, that's become it's on my computer in front of me. Lincoln's quote. So it was his letter to Congress in December 1862, and he kind of knew that he was going to sign the Emancipation
Proclamation.
law in January 1st, 1863. But it just, to me, this is a perfect example of Lincoln seeing that the crisis creates an opportunity, that uh, the chronos breaks, the dogmas of the quiet past. That's the chronos. Day after day, everything's normal, everything's fine. Crisis, the war, the country breaks apart. And then what's the kairos? But he realizes I can free the slaves as a part of my war policy as commander in chief, but I've got to free people's minds. We've got to level up. We've got to level up. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. Assuming we haven't risen to the occasion, we're overwhelmed by the occasion. We just don't know what to make of it all. So then he uses this term. So we must think anew and act anew, which to me is like unlearning and then relearning, and then this word enthrall. Now, you and I have some background. I think we both were probably raised in strong Catholic families, and we kind of knew the Catholic hymns. But John Wesley, look at the Wesleyan hymns, thrall and enthrall. It always strikes me as a religious term, and it comes out in hymns. John Milton used it in translating Psalm 4, and then Garrett, it's in hymns. And now Lincoln didn't go to church much, but that was in his, he's reading the King James Bible. But thrall and thraldom means being captured. Mm-hmm. And captured, not being a slave as in externally having chains on your wrists, but the chains of our minds. And I just kind of think Lincoln's insight there to say it's here that we're imprisoned as much as here that we're imprisoned. So how do so there's a disenthralling and then maybe a re-enthralling, but somehow we've got to let something go. The country cannot no longer live that story because the reality no longer fits it. It's a new map. It's a new story. It's a new reality. And it's a new future. And it's a new future. So the other little thing about this, he never uses it again, apparently, enthrall. But the abolitionists, Frederick Douglass used it a lot. Thrall, disenthrall. Garrison, who's the leader of the abolition, used disenthrall. But in the religious context, it was God disenthralling us from the wiles of the devil. We're captured by evil. Lincoln changes it and says, we must disenthrall ourselves. God isn't in the picture. It's it's freedom. We must be our own liberators.
It's a choice, and I love that aspect of it. We choose it.
Yeah. It's an intention. It's an intention that somehow we take hold of our fate and we take hold of our future, and we kind of decide that failure isn't failure. It's evidence that something is not working, and our first instinct is to blame Trump, or to blame the world, or to blame the immigrants, or to blame the other. But then when you think about it, hang on, maybe it's me. Maybe it's me that's in the wrong story or in the wrong map, and that most of the things that are happening I'm missing out on because my lens is so narrow. I'm blind. I'm blinkered. I'm enthralled by my own. I brought up with so many stories that have to be right because they just sound so right, and the evidence is totally to the contrary.
Yeah, it's all those old stories, like my mother saying, "Well, at least you can teach." That was a story I hung on to for a long, long time, and then realized, okay, what she was really saying was, "Let's be practical now."
Well, isn't it? But Madeline, wouldn't it be interesting to say, like, if I interviewed you back then and say, what did that story mean to you when you heard it then, and what does it mean to you now, and what happened in between? See?
Yeah.
It became a new story, didn't it? It became something.
Totally, completely.
Something which just means. So here's the other thing. I've come to my sense is, and this is all exploration. I'm not making certitudes here because I don't know, but I think I've been trapped in this quest. My background in theology is what is the meaning of something, but I suddenly realized now I've got to be concerned about where is it moving. So because even when I understand what it means, the meaning moves. So what it means on Wednesday is different from what it means on Friday, and I've got to have a map. I've got to find a map about where meaning is moving. It's about movement. It's not necessarily just about meaning.
Wow. That's a real shift in my mind. Excellent. That's very helpful because meaning does change over time.
I mean, when I first arrived in Washington, Clinton was in his first year, and Travelgate had happened, and Vince Foster had committed suicide. Everyone says Clinton's going to be a one-term president. He's a disaster. He's an absolute disgrace. And then after 4 years, okay, then the second term, and then he has the intern incident, and he's impeached and everything else. And at the end of it, the Star report, he's a disaster. He's a terrible president. And now, like now, he's an elder statesman. He's like, and you just think, isn't it fascinating how meaning moves?
Yeah.
And whatever you define now, like define means fine. It's got the ending. You define something because it's ended. You can see it all. But we're always in the middle. I think part of our way in the world is we think we're at the end, but I want you to move to the middle. When you're in the middle, you got more room, you got more space. There's still a future, folks. It's not the end.
Yeah. Now, speaking of future, can we chart the future that's emerging under our noses? And what are some tools we can use to help us create that new story?
Well, here's again, that's a wonderful question. And just a little, I don't want to confuse people more, but I found some wonderful people doing future studies and scenario planning, and we were aware of that when we were doing Golden Fleece. Shell were doing scenario planning about the energy crisis. It was a big thing. The big discovery for me was that science says the future doesn't exist, so it can't be measured. We only have the present and the past, cause and effect. But then there's a whole new field called anticipation studies, or Seligman's book called Homo Prospectus, which suddenly says, no, the future, time is plastic. It's like an Einsteinian view of time. The future is now. The future is under our feet. We need the future to give predictive sense to what we're doing now. So I use the example. If a Martian arrived tomorrow morning in Washington and just viewed what was going on, the Martian would see kids getting up and, well, they're not going to school, but they're going to summer camp. You'd see mums and dads getting up and making breakfast and then going to work. You'd see someone studying for their law exam. And the Martian, someone would ask the Martian, explain all that. Explain all that. And to me, the simplest thing, it's those actions have predictive sense. They only make sense. You only get up in the morning if there's something to get up for. You only study that law book, which is boring as hell, because you've got a bar exam for the New York bar in September. So everything, the action that we do only makes sense, or maybe not only, maybe that's too strong, but it makes sense in terms of the future. So the predictive sense of every action we do means the future's involved in everything we do. And that when things break down, we blame the past, but it may be the future that didn't hold together. It may be the future, that anticipatory muscle that we have. Maybe that was overstated, or maybe we didn't embrace failure enough to readjust. So suddenly I was saying, oh my God, the future is, I can blame the present on the future, not the past. So it's kind of rewiring my brain about time. And I'm thinking, you know what? You get up in the morning, it's the future that's driving you. Or no, actually, there's the two, not driving you, it's drawing you. There's the distinction. Yeah. Psychology says we're driven by deep impulses, But the future draws us. It's like a magnet. Come on, Madeline, you've got something left in you. Come on, keep going, keep doing it. It's drawing you. It's like a gravitational sort of force.
This is interesting because when I have worked with organizations to write future stories,
Mm-hmm.
I would always begin asking them to tell stories from their past.
Mm-hmm.
Not because they were going to necessarily use it to create the future, but to just ground them. Now, the irony is that as they defined the future, there were elements that sort of just naturally made their way into the future story. So much so that they literally could see themselves in that future because
Mm-hmm.
they recognized the language from the past.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, and then that you're right, then that future story began to draw them to it.
Right. Well, and part of it is if the future is out there and drawing us, but then part of it is the discovery that it's not just out there; it's under our feet,
Correct.
and that even the present. I have a methodology which I call the future archaeology method, which is the ground we're walking on contains so many broken futures and unfulfilled futures, and some futures can be revived and some futures. It's kind of like what Lincoln does in the Gettysburg Address. In the Civil War, he starts off with saying, 4 score and 7 years ago, we created a future back then, and now it's being tested,
Yeah.
and the war is getting in the way, but we want to move it back into being on the way, to the future. So the future is what impelled this whole, which kind of then makes this Supreme Court's originalism sort of insane, really. Like looking back, the founders were looking to the future, and we look back as if it's sort of scripture, that it's about the past. The founders didn't want the past to be the authoritative voice. Otherwise, they would have stayed with King George III. They were building a future, and I guess the future would be asking us, how are you doing on that? How
Yeah.
are you doing on the future that we set in motion? So to me, then an understanding of memory, what you did with the future stories, and Golden Fleece came out of that future story process that you were so inspirational with. It's just like memory actually is about the future. It's not about the past. Memory gives the past a future.
Hmm.
If we didn't have a memory of you, you talked about your mum saying, what about being a teacher? You've given that story a future by
Yeah.
giving it a memory. So it's about the future, and see how it's unfolded for you, how
Yeah.
incredible it's unfolded for you. Like it's become a touchstone for you, hasn't it? Which
Yes, it
means
has.
you think of it as the past, but in fact, it's the future.
Wow.
It's the
Well,
future.
you just said something also that where we are, it's not in the way, but it's on the way.
Right.
It's a beautiful shift in language that completely frees me to not worry. It's not in my way. It's just on the way. So I'll just keep going. Yeah.
Right. Well, the future is calling. Maybe there's a sort of a spiritual thing here. The future is calling you forward. You
Yeah.
get up in the morning and you have another day to live and breathe, and the sun is shining. The future keeps calling you forward, keeps calling you forward. And then it's only a problem because it gets in the way of that future.
Yeah.
So, but if I recontextualize the problem, not as a problem story, but as something blocking me from the future, that's giving me the resources and pulling me forward. There's a book years and years ago. What was it called? The Path of Least Resistance. It was about energy, and it's about if we release the future to give us the energy it has on offer for us, no matter how young or old we are, if we release the future to give us the energy to pull us towards it, then we're going to be celebrating the next 250 years of the American project. We're not going to be so interested in just the past, but there's a future at stake here. What energy does the future still have? And it has infinite energy.
Well, all of this is so exciting to hear. even though I've read the book and, and have talked to you many times, this every time we get into conversation, something new opens up.
Yeah. That's you and me. I
I
mean,
know.
Madeline, often when we're at a coffee shop, and I don't know whether you do, you and I get in and we forget. And then as we leave, we look around at the people and they're looking at us, or they're kind of, I mean, often someone will come up to me and tap me on the shoulder and say, Paul, thank you for that lecture on metaphysics. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm sorry. I say, I'm sorry I was so loud. I'm sorry, I'm half dead. Like, I didn't mean.
Well, I want us to just sort of uh, maybe harness some of this. How can individuals use this framework to examine their own life?
Well, a couple of things, I suppose. I mean, I love the book Start With Why, but I want to write a book and say, no, start with where, because the book actually does start with where. If you say start with why, you're actually starting with where, because your first word is start, and start is a word about where begin. So I think part of it is maybe to decompress, take a deep breath, take a couple of deep breaths, and don't look at history as the sort of tradition of the authority to define where we are now, but history as a sort of a breathing exercise to say, you know what, like they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, like, this too shall pass, and we've been here before. Maybe we haven't, maybe we have, but there's a future when we move to the middle. The end has all the drama and the tragedy and the passion and the panic and the anxiety. And then you say, that's ground zero of stories. And the power of stories is to make us feel even more panic. Get into a balloon, get into a balloon and look and get into the middle. And then start thinking, well, you know what? How have you dealt with some of this? That's where the history and the memory is important. Where this is different, but have you been challenged before? Yes. What did you do? You must have done something because you're still here. And so here's the thing: the exercise I would say to people is like, try this. The future is a surprise. So predicting it is, as you said in your notes, trying to predict it. But if you and I, Madeline, did the timeline and told our story of life as a history of surprises, did you think did you dream as a 5-year-old that you'd end up at the World Bank or the IMF?
No,
That's a
no. It
surprise.
was a big surprise.
Did you think that you'd be living on a beautiful farm out there where you
Oh,
are with the cows? Like, that's a surprise. Did you think you'd be talking to some crazy guy like me? That's a surprise. So I think when we tell our story as the history of surprises, we somehow reinvigorate the future and its energy to captivate us and enthrall us in a way that pulls us forward, not pulls us back. So, in other words, tomorrow, like I listen on the news and I get bored because the same thing is being said over and over and over and over and over and over. But I sense with my work with AmeriCorps and working with kids and say something new is happening here, something's emerging, something exciting, something extraordinary, not just artificial intelligence. And sort of, I better have a story that a curiosity that somehow plugs into that. Otherwise, I'm going to be irrelevant. I'm not going to. There's energy out there in the world, and it's the energy of the future. So surround yourself. I got to say to people, if all the people in your life are the same age as you, maybe, go visit a kindergarten.
yes.
You
I
know,
am with you completely on that one.
this and don't become the grouchy old man that says, when
Mm-mm.
I was 50
No,
I knew all
no.
about this. Like, our generation will need to be investing in a future that will outlive us.
Yeah.
And that's the tribute of achievement, to say I made a difference, because when I'm gone, I've got a Taoiseach of Ireland running and doing the job, or I've got a Gazan
Yep.
kid in Ireland now who's going to meet the president of Ireland next week. I think my investment now and what I've learned over so many years of mistakes and unlearning, it's the future that matters, and the future is going to hold us accountable.
Paul Costello, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Look around. Is there anybody else in the cafe? They've all left, or who are these two crazy people?
Thank you.
Thank you, my dear. You're a delight. Thank you. Let's catch up sooner.
Okay. Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. I remember going to a workshop where I was asked to write a story of a very difficult moment in my life. A time when I failed, a time when I was deeply misunderstood. You get the drift. I found the exercise almost impossible to do. It was supposed to be a story that was difficult, unhappy, impactful in the extreme. The focus was to describe the challenge, the hurt, the sorrow, and many events came up in my memory, but I found that they all worked out in the end. I took that workshop again and again because even though I never could find a story that passed muster, I learned a great deal about other things. Now, about the fifth time, I found a story where they said finally, Madelyn, you got it. It was then I realized that it was simply a story that had not ended. It was still unresolved. That was when I realized that if my story was bad or sad, the story simply wasn't over yet. I had to search for one that wasn't yet resolved. That led me to why my tough stories seemed to end so well. It was then that I stumbled upon an old story that went something like this. I love reading biographies, and one that I read was of a woman in the 14th century. In England, she was known as Julian of Norwich. She wrote a text called Revelations of Divine Love, which is the earliest surviving English language text by a woman. What struck me was her saying, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well. When I read that, it was like hearing a story that seemed to be written for me. To me, it meant that no matter what happened to me in my life, all would be well in the end. I just had to wait until the end. I had taken an old story and made a new story for myself, what Paul calls in his framework an innovation. What really struck me as I thought through this idea is how effective that new story was for me. Time and again, difficult times for me were resolved. Some in a few moments, some took years. No wonder that I found it so hard to find a difficult story for that workshop that they thought was the kind of story they were looking for. In my fifth time attending, I finally found that story. And it was really tough. And as I said, I realized it simply was not over yet. In that moment, I decided that I had learned the lesson from this workshop that I had to learn even though it wasn't the lesson they were trying to teach. When I realized that, I just kept moving on in tough times. I could see the seed of my own work in resilience. And I would say, thinking of what Paul was just talking about, these events became on the way, not in the way. I like that phrase. See, I define resilience as living in the space of being hit with something and choosing to do something about it. It comes from Viktor Frankl, who said between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Adding the fact that my own story was filled with trying until the end finally came reinforces that confidence in your own ability to make the choice. Today, one of the insights I have gained from my research is that those who have lived through crises or challenges and decided to move on develop stronger resilience from the very confidence gained in doing so. What Paul helped me see is that these old stories do not always arrive as grand moments of triumph or tragedy. Sometimes they're extraordinarily ordinary. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope this conversation has offered you new ways of thinking about life and thinking about the future. And if you're on YouTube, I'm going to ask you to click the like button and subscribe. It's an easy, free way to support what I do so that I can keep doing this, so that others who want to have this kind of information and find it can. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.